Cyrthos Prime hung in the void like a jewel poisoned. Smoke and ash curled from its surface, a sickly pall over cities that once thrummed with industry. The orbiting Imperial fleet shuddered under orbital cannons, firing warning shots at nothing visible. Yet the Inquisitor knew better. Something lived below the smog, and it was watching. Lieutenant Varus adjusted his helm. The third company of the Iron Vultures stood behind him, bolters ready, armor dented from a lifetime of conflict. Their drop pods screamed through the ash-choked atmosphere, each one a firebolt against the dark clouds. They landed in the industrial district of Varcolis, a city that should have been alive with machinery. Instead, the streets were empty, silent, and cracked with dried blood. "Eyes sharp," Varus commanded. "The Emperor protects, but we must strike first." Sergeant Malric, battle-hardened and scarred, scanned the alleys. He had fought against orcs, tyrannids, and chaos cultists, but the silence here was unnatural. The air carried a weight, a presence that clawed at the mind. A gust of wind carried the stench of burnt metal and sulfur. Suddenly, a scream erupted from a side street. Brother Cor's voxcaster fizzled violently. "It's nothing. It's gone." The static choked his words. A wall across the street shattered inward, sending metal shards and dust spiraling into the air. Shadows twisted across the debris. Varus raised his bolter. Nothing moved. Only the echo of screams lingered. The squad advanced cautiously into the industrial complex. Massive furnaces, once glowing with molten ore, now lay cold and silent. The null shade, though unseen, left its mark. Shadows shifted unnaturally across walls and machinery. Bolter fire struck the air, but rounds bent away mid-flight. Brother Jalen froze, staring at an empty corridor. His eyes widened as a shadow stretched across the wall, fingers reaching for him. He screamed. Malric opened fire, but the rounds bounced harmlessly off nothing. Varus slammed his fist on his helmet comlink. "Report!" No response. The squad's voxcasters had been rendered useless. Static hissed. Then the darkness struck. Shapes, twisted combinations of steel and flesh, surged from the shadows. Limbs fused together in impossible configurations. Faces appeared in the walls themselves, screaming silently. The Space Marines fired everything they had, bolters, plasma guns, flamers, but the monsters absorbed the attacks, moving faster than the eye could follow. Lieutenant Varus grabbed Brother Cor. Fall back to the extraction point." The retreat turned into chaos. Smoke and fire filled the corridors. Brother Malric fell first, his scream swallowed by the shadows. Brother Jalen vanished mid-step, leaving only a smear of blood. Above the planet, the Emperor's judgment orbited silently. Inquisitor Lord Varric studied the chaos unfolding below. He had dispatched the fleet to ensure the Imperium's might, but reports were horrifying. Entire districts had vanished beneath the Nullshade's influence. Even orbital bombardments were ineffective, leaving the enemy untouched. "Lord Varric, the squads are—" a tech priest began. "They are gone," Varric interrupted, his voice flat, "and we do not know why." The fleet unleashed orbital bombardments, firestorm after firestorm, glassing city after city. Ash rose like a black tide into the sky. Yet when the smoke cleared, the Nullshade remained. No bodies, no remnants, only a creeping darkness that defied the laws of matter and mind. Back on the surface, the survivors regrouped. Lieutenant Varus's squad was reduced to 4. They huddled in the wreckage of a collapsed forge. Fear was tangible, thick enough to taste. Every sound, a dripping pipe, the hiss of wind through broken machinery, felt like the Nullshade's fingers brushing against their minds. Varus recorded a log, hands trembling. "The Emperor protects, yet I feel his gaze absent. Shadows move where no shadow should be. They watch, they wait. We are ants, and it is a storm. I fear we shall not survive the night." The Nullshade was patient. It did not strike constantly. It allowed the Marines to see, to feel, to anticipate, and then it tore that hope away. Shadows crept along the walls, coiling like living smoke. Shapes emerged, faces of the dead fused to steel constructs, whispering horrors in a language older than Terra. The squad fired again. Nothing. Brother Kor screamed, his voice twisted into something alien, and then silence. Varys gritted his teeth. We will hold until the Emperor decides otherwise. The horror was not just physical. The Nullshade attacked the mind. Memories warped. Brothers questioned themselves. Varys remembered a mission on Tarsus IV, a simple chaos cult, and he laughed bitterly at the comparison. This was not a mission. This was a lesson in futility. The air vibrated with whispers. Each one carried a promise: despair, death, madness. Even the stoic Marines could not resist. Varys clenched his jaw. Survival depended not on strength, but on willpower, and willpower alone could not defeat the Nullshade. As night fell, Cyrthos Prime became a labyrinth of fear. Smoke and shadows stretched endlessly. Somewhere beyond sight, the enemy moved, patient, intelligent, inescapable.
The Nullshade did not move like a living thing. It flowed, a darkness that twisted in on itself, seeping into every crack and crevice of Cyrthos Prime. The survivors whispered its name in fear, though the word itself carried no meaning, only dread. Shadows shifted where no light existed, coiling over walls, over rubble, over the minds of men. Lieutenant Varys led the remaining squad through a shattered corridor, each step echoing against twisted steel. Every breath brought the metallic tang of blood and ash. Every heartbeat seemed magnified, pounding in ears that heard more than they should. Brother Mulrich's bolter jammed mid-round. He slammed it against his armor, cursing under his breath, and tried again. Sparks flew from the barrel, but the next shot simply vanished, swallowed by the darkness. Across the hall, Brother Kor froze, staring at a shadow that stretched across the floor like liquid ink. It moved toward him, not crawling, not running, but sliding, a living smear of impossibility. Kor screamed, his voice stretched, warping as if the air itself conspired against him. Then it stopped. Nothing remained. Varys gritted his teeth, bolter firing blindly, but the shadow seemed amused, unscathed by every round. Above them, the orbital fleet monitored the planet, eyes wide with disbelief. Lord Varrick's fingers traced the holoscreens, each showing cities engulfed in black smoke, yet no enemy appeared in any sensor scan. "It cannot be contained," he muttered. The tech priests hovered nearby, robes billowing, their servo arms twitching nervously. "My lord," one whispered, "this presence, it is neither Xenos nor demonic. It absorbs energy, folds time. It is impossible to catalogue." Varrick's face darkened. He had studied the warp. He had studied the abyssal powers of chaos. Yet this was beyond comprehension. He looked down at the remaining planetary forces, hundreds of Imperial soldiers, and knew they would be consumed. The Nullshade did not attack openly. It moved with patience, letting the Imperium strike first. Entire districts were reduced to rubble from orbital bombardments, but when the smoke cleared, nothing remained. No bodies, no scorched remains, only the sense that something watched from everywhere at once. The shadows coalesced into forms, grotesque parodies of human and machine. Faces merged with steel, limbs fused impossibly, and they whispered, each sound twisting the minds of those who heard. Brother Jalen, standing beside Varys, trembled uncontrollably. It knows us," he whispered. "It knows our fears." Varys gritted his teeth, forcing his squad forward.
Focus on the objective. The Emperor does not abandon his sons. Not now, not ever. But even he could feel the creeping despair, the way hope slithered from his mind as easily as water through fingers. The null shade toyed with them, appearing just out of sight, then vanishing, leaving the sense of immense weight pressing down upon them. Every step forward felt like a march into madness. In a ruined plaza, the null shade finally revealed itself in part. Shadows solidified into grotesque forms, tall and thin, limbs angular and glistening with dark metal fused to flesh. They did not walk, they glided, leaving no marks. One turned its head, an empty void where eyes should have been, and Varus felt his mind recoil. Images of past failures, memories of comrades dying, surged unbidden into his thoughts. The creature whispered, and the words were not words but feelings, despair, terror, futility. The squad fired again, bolters roaring, flamers scorching the air. Each attack struck the creature, only to see it absorb the energy, each shot feeding them, learning from them, adapting. Malric screamed as a shadow coiled around him like liquid steel. Varus reached for him, bolter blazing, but the darkness reacted before he could move. Malric's body twisted and stretched, elongated in ways that should have been impossible. The scream of the human, the sound of bone bending and skin tearing, echoed off the ruined buildings, mixing with static cries that seemed to come from every direction. And then he was gone, leaving only the echoes behind. Kor's hands shook as he raised his plasma gun. We can't fight it," he gasped. "It's everywhere. It's inside our heads." Varus turned to him, seeing the pale fear in his eyes, the same fear reflected in himself. He opened his comms, trying to reach the fleet. "We need fire support now. Coordinates." The Vox fizzled, then went dead. The null shade had cut them off from everything, not with force, but with the impossibility of its being. Above the planet, Varric slammed a fist against the console. The orbital fleet sensors were useless. Titans, orbital bombardments, artillery strikes, they were ineffective against this entity. The null shade existed outside conventional reality. It adapted, absorbed, and learned. Nothing destroyed it, nothing slowed it, and each failed strike only gave it more understanding. The squad stumbled into a collapsed warehouse. Walls were fractured, beams twisted into impossible angles. Shadows clung to every surface, moving against physics, crawling, writhing. Varus could hear the faint whispering of his brothers' voices, but they were wrong, distorted, mocking, filled with despair. "Do you see? They are already part of it." The voice of Kor, or was it Kor, taunted. The lieutenant's mind recoiled. He shook his head, trying to banish the thought. Jalen's face contorted in terror. It can see into us. It knows what we fear. It knows what we... He fell silent, staring at an empty corner, sweat pouring down his face. Varus could not look away from the space he imagined the null shade to occupy. A faint pulse of energy traveled through the air, and suddenly the warehouse seemed larger, impossibly large, like a void folding space around them. Varus raised his bolter and fired again. Sparks danced across the shadows, then vanished. The null shade had no mass, no form as they understood it. It was not here, yet it was everywhere. It laughed, or something laughed through their minds, a chorus of alien sound. The squad screamed, disoriented and hopeless. Night fell across Cyrthos Prime, bringing no relief. The null shade did not sleep, did not tire, and did not rest. It was patient. It let the few remaining survivors huddle in fear, amplifying their terror, stretching the night into an eternity. Varus could hear the slow, impossible rhythm of the shadows moving across the ruined city. The streets were empty, yet the sense of presence was absolute. In the orbital fleet, Varric stared at the holoscreens, hands clenched. He realized the truth. The Imperium could not destroy this enemy.
Not with firepower, not with faith, not with psychic might. It was something beyond catalog, beyond reason, not even against chaos itself. And yet, the Null Shade waited, always watching, always learning. Somewhere in the darkness, it was planning its next move. Varys wrote in his log one last time before moving forward into the ruined city. "We are ants. It is the storm. The Emperor may protect us, but only by his will. I fear we are already too late. I fear that nothing will remain after this night, not even the hope that we carry." The words were almost immediately swallowed by the whispers. The Null Shade moved closer. Its presence was a weight pressing against reality itself, bending mind, matter, and spirit. And as the squad disappeared one by one into shadows that should not exist, Varys understood the truth. Cyrthos Prime was not merely a battlefield. It was a lesson, and the Null Shade was the teacher.
The ash-choked plains of Cyrthos Prime shuddered under the march of Imperial Titans. Their massive legs shook the ground, each footfall a drumbeat of war. Bolters roared from the surface, artillery ripped the air apart, and Space Marine squads advanced with unwavering precision. Yet even as the machines of the Imperium unleashed their fury, the Null Shade remained untouched, watching, calculating, learning. Captain Rogar of the Iron Vultures gritted his teeth as he surveyed the battlefield from his Terminator armor. The remaining squad, bolstered by fresh reinforcements, moved with disciplined precision. But the air was thick with something unnatural. A low hum, barely audible at first, grew into a maddening chorus, echoing inside their helmets. Shadows twisted around them, crawling along the ground, clinging to walls, and bending reality itself. "Formation!" Rogar barked. "Do not falter! Do not give in!" But faltering had already begun. Brother Jalen froze mid-step, his eyes glazing over. He screamed, but the sound seemed swallowed by a vacuum that had no place in this world. From the corner of Rogar's vision, he saw what appeared to be the body of Malric, or a grotesque version of him, fused with twisted metal, twitching and whispering in voices that were not his own. The Null Shade had claimed him, reshaped him, and mocked the living. The Space Marines fired relentlessly, bolters and plasma destroying everything tangible in front of them. Titans unleashed missiles that carved craters into the ground. Flamers incinerated shadows that moved unnaturally fast. Still, the Null Shade adapted, absorbing energy, learning from every strike. It was impossible to hit, impossible to predict, impossible to understand. Each victory for the Imperium became a lesson for the enemy. Lieutenant Varys pressed forward with a squad of survivors, bolter blazing. Around them, entire regiments were vanishing. Soldiers screamed as their bodies elongated, folded into impossible angles, and disappeared entirely. Time itself seemed unstable. Seconds stretched into eternities, then collapsed without warning. Varys gritted his teeth. "We must hold the line, for the Emperor!" The Null Shade's influence was no longer just physical. It was mental, psychic, omnipresent. Psychers screamed, vomiting blood as the creature invaded their minds. Commissars attempted to inspire courage, but their words became echoes in an empty chamber. Even the most battle-hardened veterans of the Third Company began to falter, despair gnawing at their resolve. From orbit, Lord Varric watched the carnage. Hollow screens displayed Titans tearing through terrain that seemed alive, entire armies disappearing into black voids that shouldn't exist. He realized the full scale of the disaster. This was not a battle. It was a slaughter against a foe that could not be fought with conventional weapons. Back on the ground, shadows coalesced into grotesque forms. Tall, thin, impossibly long-limbed, their faces distorted into human parodies. They floated just above the surface, leaving no marks, making no sound, yet their presence was undeniable. Varys raised his bolter, and the shadows reacted before he could fire. They twisted space, warping light, making every movement feel wrong. Brother Kor tried to aim, but the weapon felt like it weighed tons. Every step was a fight against gravity itself. One shadow lunged, absorbing the plasma fire from a nearby Titan's gun as if it were air. Sparks erupted, systems failed, and the colossal war machine groaned as its sensors overloaded. The Space Marines shouted, firing everything they had, yet nothing harmed the creature. Rogar screamed orders, desperate, but no commands could undo the creeping horror around them. Time fractured further. Moments repeated, split, and folded. Soldiers saw images of themselves dying before it happened. Faces of long-dead comrades appeared in the smoke, screaming for help that could not be given. The Nullshade thrived on fear, shaping it, feeding on it, making each Marine relive their deepest guilt and terror. Varys' squad moved into the ruins of a massive cathedral, the ground beneath them littered with corpses. He recorded in his helmet log, "Every moment we survive feels borrowed. The enemy is not of flesh or bone, it is inevitability. It sees into our minds, our fears, our failures, and turns them against us. The Emperor may watch, but here we are forgotten."
Within the cathedral, the Nullshade revealed more of itself. Shadows twisted into forms that seemed familiar, figures of their lost brothers, armored as if ready for battle, yet their faces melted into screaming voids. Varys saw Mulric standing ahead, motionless. "Brother Mulric," he called. The response was a distorted laugh, not human, not any sound the ears could register. The shadow lunged, and Mulric's body evaporated into darkness, leaving only Varys' shaking reflection in a shard of broken glass. Jalen collapsed, muttering words that made no sense, his mind shredded by visions of the impossible. Varys grabbed him, dragging him toward an exit as the cathedral walls seemed to grow, stretching endlessly. The squad fired blindly at shadows, at nothing, at memories made manifest. Each shot strengthened the Nullshade, teaching it, adapting to their weapons, predicting their movements. Rogar's voice cut through the chaos. "All units converge on the central plaza. Use Titans as shields." The remaining Terminators obeyed, firing their massive guns in synchronized volleys. Explosions ripped through the plaza, leveling entire streets. But as the smoke cleared, the Nullshade emerged, untouched, a black mass that shifted with a mind of its own. Varys' squad had been reduced to 3. They moved cautiously across the debris, each footstep echoing like a drumbeat of doom. The shadows slithered behind them, and every ruined building seemed alive, bending, swallowing, reflecting their fear back at them. The Nullshade's whispers intensified, threading through their minds. "You cannot win. You are already mine." Above the planet, Lord Verret clenched his jaw. "There is no winning this fight," he muttered. "Only survival, and even that." His eyes lingered on the surface, where the last remnants of the iron vultures disappeared into the black fog. The Nullshade was patient. It did not need to strike immediately. It allowed the survivors to see, to hope, to act, and then it removed all hope in a single moment. The cathedral exploded silently around them, not with fire, but with space folding in on itself. Walls vanished, ceilings collapsed into nothingness, and the remaining Marines found themselves in an endless void where shadows loomed on every side. Varys raised his bolter, hands shaking. "For the Emperor, we fight until our last breath." But he knew deep inside that the Nullshade did not fight to die. It existed to consume, to teach, to endure, and in its patience it had already won. The squad advanced, bolter fire blazing, Titans firing their massive cannons, artillery shaking mountains, and yet the Nullshade absorbed, adapted, and learned. Every strike was futile, every victory temporary, every action a lesson for a foe beyond comprehension. The air was thick with despair. Shadows moved like liquid, impossible forms dancing on the edges of perception. Soldiers screamed, their voices merging with the echoes of the past, their fear magnified into an almost tangible presence. Varus's comms were dead, the orbital fleet unable to intervene. The nullshade had cut them off from everything, isolating them in a nightmare with no end. And in the final moment before exhaustion overtook him, Varus saw the truth. The nullshade was not a creature to be slain. It was inevitability. It was the absence of hope given form. It was everywhere and nowhere, patient, intelligent, unstoppable. As his squad fell one by one into shadows that should not exist, he understood that Cyrthos Prime was lost. The Imperium's might, its titans, its bolters, its faith, none of it mattered. The nullshade had already claimed victory in ways that were beyond mortal comprehension. Varus whispered into the void, a prayer, a curse, a confession. The Emperor may forgive us, but he cannot save us. Not here, not now, not ever.
The planet was silent. Smoke curled from the ruins of Varcolis and the surrounding industrial districts, black tendrils rising into a sky the color of rusted metal. Ash drifted like snow, covering the remnants of machinery, bodies, and buildings that had once been alive with industry and human endeavor. Cyrthos Prime had been a jewel of the segmentum obscurus, a vital source of rare ores, and now it was a tomb. Not a single life remained unscarred, not a single structure unbroken. The orbital fleet claimed victory. Holoscreens flashed images of scorched streets, demolished factories, and entire districts reduced to molten rubble. Official reports would call it a triumph of imperial might. Yet aboard the Emperor's judgment, Inquisitor Lord Varric did not see victory. He saw absence. He saw silence. He saw the nullshade, untouched, watching, learning, waiting. From the rubble, a lone survivor stumbled forward. Varus, battered, burned, and haunted by what he had witnessed, carried no weapons. His armor was scorched and cracked, his bolter long since useless. He moved with the hollow gait of a man who had seen too much, who had held the dead in his arms, and who had faced the impossible and survived by chance alone. The ruined streets stretched endlessly before him, shadows curling unnaturally around debris, whispering, mocking, pressing on his mind like a physical weight. He saw the remnants of his squad, Jalen, Kor, Malric, now fused with machinery, twisted into shapes that defied reality. They were alive and dead at once, the nullshade's work, teaching, torturing, reshaping. Each figure was a warning, a mirror of what had been, a vision of what could happen to him. Varus turned away, stomach heaving, but he could not escape the whispers. "They are watching," he murmured to himself. "They are everywhere. The Emperor may have turned his eyes, but I feel him absent here." The nullshade did not strike in open form. It did not need to. It existed as absence, as pressure, as an impossibility. Shadows stretched across the ruins like fingers of cold, reaching into his mind, reminding him of failures past and fears present. Time itself seemed to twist. Moments from missions decades before flashed in impossible sequence. Faces of fallen comrades appeared where no one could be. Varus's knees buckled. He clutched his helmet, willing his mind to stay intact, willing his eyes to see the world as it was, rather than how the nullshade made it. From orbit, Lord Varric observed silently, heart heavy. Entire Imperial regiments had vanished, Titans and orbital bombardments had failed, psychers had been broken, their screams echoing through the void. He realized the horrifying truth. The Imperium had encountered a force it could not destroy, and the Null Shade had survived not just physically, but intellectually. Every attack, every assault had been a lesson, and the enemy had adapted perfectly. Varys stumbled into what remained of the central plaza. The Null Shade manifested briefly, a ripple in the air that bent light and shadow. He saw shapes that seemed like familiar figures, only to distort into screaming, impossible forms. His brothers' voices echoed, whispering, mocking, warning. His mind strained under the psychic weight, and then nothing. A void of silence and ash, broken only by the faint hum of the planet's corrupted machinery. He fell to his knees, weeping, not for himself, but for the world, for the men who had died, for the Imperium that had failed to understand. The Null Shade watched from everywhere and nowhere, patient, unhurried, immortal, in ways that human minds could not grasp. Cyrthos Prime was a lesson, and Varys was the only witness left. In the distance, shadows shifted, and he could swear that one form took the shape of Lord Malric, holding a bolter in its impossibly long fingers. Its face was gone, replaced with a void that whispered his failures back at him. Varys closed his eyes and whispered a prayer he did not believe. "The Emperor forgive me for surviving." The Null Shade moved silently across the ruined city, consuming, reshaping, waiting. Its hunger was not for flesh alone, but for fear, for despair, for inevitability itself. It was a force beyond comprehension, beyond catalogue, beyond reason. It had no motive other than existence, and in its existence it had already triumphed.
Hours, days, or perhaps weeks passed. Varys did not know, for time had become unreliable, twisted by the Null Shade's presence. He wandered through the ash and ruins, witnessing remnants of battles, echoes of screams, and the unnatural fusion of flesh and steel that marked the Null Shade's work. Every sight was a reminder. The enemy was not to be fought, it was to be survived. And survival came at a cost: the mind, the body, and the soul. Eventually, he emerged from the ruins of the cathedral, the sky above the city a sickly red, ash and smoke drifting endlessly. Cyrthos Prime was lost. The Imperium would record victory and hide the truth, as it always did, but the Null Shade remained, untouched, unchallenged, and patient. Somewhere in the darkness of the galaxy, it waited, learning, spreading. Varys fell to the ground, exhausted, and raised his gaze to the sky. He could see no ships above, no Titans, no hope, only ash, shadow, and the unfeeling presence of the Null Shade. His calms remained dead. There would be no rescue, no reinforcements, no solace, only silence and the knowledge that the enemy had survived. He spoke aloud, though no one remained to hear. The Imperium prides itself on victory, on order, on certainty. But some forces cannot be destroyed. Some enemies are not meant to be fought. Some shadows stretch beyond the light, beyond the reach of man. A final shiver ran through him as the Null Shade's whispers filled his mind, impossibly close, yet unseen. It promised nothing but inevitability. It promised the endless stretching of fear, despair, and patience. Cyrthos Prime had been claimed, and the Imperium's might had failed utterly. Varys rose slowly, haunted, broken, and alone. He turned his gaze from the ruined city toward the horizon. Somewhere the Null Shade waited, patient, eternal, unstoppable. And he knew, with a certainty as heavy as the ash beneath his feet, that one day it would return. And when it did, the galaxy would have no warning, no defense, only the inevitability of shadows that could not be destroyed.